this is Evelyn Lopez. Welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear, the Earth911.com podcast for the week of September 23, 2019, which means we are into fall. So today we're going to talk about what's good for you and what's good for your home. We will be looking at the environmental impact of CBD, which you've probably seen in everything. Some ideas for vertical gardening and some DIY projects for using reclaimed wood from wooden pallets. And we're also going to talk about how to compare solar energy bids to get the very best installer. Now, it's sort of a rainy morning in Tacoma, Washington, but still very lovely at the Verdant Moonyard Studio. I have with me Mitch Ratcliffe, our Earth911 publisher. Mitch, where are you today, and how are you today?
Not quite as verdant as
Not as verdant?
Studios. But it's a nice rainy green day in the Northwest.
Very nice. And our Earth911 writer, Sarah Lozanova. Sarah, where are you and how are you today?
I'm doing well, thanks, Evelyn. I am in sunny Mid-Coast Maine, and it's nice and warm here, actually.
Oh, that sounds very nice.
Well, there you go. It's a good thing to be in the fall. Are the colors starting?
They're just starting. Yeah.
Excellent.
I'm getting my camera ready for the colors. That's what I really like to take photographs in the fall.
Yeah, so beautiful. So beautiful. Well, let's talk about some things that are good for you in body and in home. First up is CBD, which is everywhere. I mean, I'll tell you, even at the drugstore Bartels, I've seen on the sign there advertising CBD products. So it's everywhere. Yep. And used for all kinds of things, but is it eco-friendly? Mitch, what do you know about this?
Well, living in Washington State, which was one of the first states to become a legal cannabis state, CBD arrived here roughly 6-7 years ago and has spread all over the country as people realized that it is not a hallucinogen, but has certain medical properties that help you relax, minimize anxiety, and so forth. So CBD is the non-psychoactive part of cannabis, and it is primarily harvested from hemp rather than cannabis. So hemp is a legal crop. It's grown for, amongst other things, and the most familiar reason is to make rope. Oh. So you can extract CBD from hemp, and that's where most of it comes from. That means that most of it is farmed industrially or by farmers who are at least growing many acres of this stuff at one time. And it doesn't take a whole lot of water for hemp to grow. 25 to 30 inches a year is more than enough water for these weeds to grow in a farm. So they're not unsustainable at the farm itself. They don't require much or any pesticide. They don't really need much in the way of fertilizer. So it's more about the harvesting, processing, and transportation of the materials, and that's where you get into sustainability questions. So CBD in and of itself is a sustainable crop, but its delivery in this billion-dollar market that has emerged around CBD, so that now it's at Bartell in a capsule form that you can take supposedly to sleep or to reduce pain. All of that industrial process is not going to be any more sustainable than anything else that uses plastic packaging and ships products halfway around the country in order to get to the market. So that's where we have to think about how we are producing this stuff in order to make it sustainable. And, if you're looking for particularly eco-friendly products in the market for CBD, we do have a list in our Is CBD Eco-Friendly article. That includes hemp-infused coffees, pain-relieving products, skin care, supplements supplements that you can buy that include the planting of a tree to offset the other ecological costs of the product. So there's a lot of ways you can make additional investments with your money to get a clean product that is really good for the planet as well as good for you. And that's what you need to understand about CBD. We have a question, and we'll talk about this later in Earthling Questions, about how to determine how pure the stuff is. But in terms of the packaging and the growth, it's a it's a potentially very sustainable business that needs to learn a few lessons.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's very interesting about the article that we have on the website is that we've gone through and really looked at a few products and given a sort of a review of their eco-friendliness. And I really appreciate that, because otherwise you get sort of overwhelmed by choice. But the other thing that I really appreciate about the CBD industry, the emerging industry, is that at least at this point, it has been a great place for very small businesses to get into the market early and to sort of develop some market share. Now, that may change, because I know some of the big pharma is looking at CBD too.
Yeah, it's a craft industry to begin with, for sure, but many are. And we'll have to be very diligent about the industrially produced CBD products as they become more popular. And looking at Washington State, there were a lot more small businesses early on, and there are already dominant players. The farms don't make a great deal of money anymore because there's an oversupply. It's the processors and the people who do the distribution who make the money now. So in a lot of ways, we're already seeing the traditional devaluation of the actual labor of growing the material. It's the processing that's getting the premium.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the other positive for me is that we read articles every now and again about different uses of hemp, as a building material, as a fiber for fabrics, as a, something that can be used maybe as a paper substitute. And yet that hasn't really taken off. But I would think, anything that, starts getting sort of more hemp product, then there may be creative uses for the off product, when the CBD is extracted from it, what is left over and how can it be used?
Well, and the hemp fiber is not destroyed by the extraction of the CBD. So one of the things I had noticed as we were doing research on back to school stuff that's sustainable is that hemp backpacks are very popular these days. Unfortunately, they all have a cannabis leaf on it.
Well, that's probably why they're popular.
It's really interesting how much the whole hemp marijuana industry has changed in the last few years. And you raise a really good point about how there are companies that are really trying to make themselves more sustainable. And so in a growth industry, it's great to, as more eco-conscious consumers, to really have our voice heard and to vote with our dollars too.
Yeah, and resisting just migrating to the fastest, cheapest, most cheaply made product just because it's available, and standing up for the small business that does take the time to offset would be a great way for us as consumers to make sure that this industry, as it grows, and the cannabis industry across the United States is growing like from 7 billion to 26 billion. It's a big, giant industry, and often run by former criminals. That doesn't make those people bad people. They were growing it in a very odd situation before, but it's not an environment used to accountability, and that's what we have to work on. But I encourage everybody to take a look who's interested in CBD, and Elizabeth Weiss's story on the site. It's is CBD eco-friendly? She really did a great job of covering all the bases.
Yeah. Well, we thought I'd move on from, CBD and hemp agriculture to home agriculture. So we have a couple of interesting articles about home gardening. First about vertical gardening, and then second about, making your own wooden pallet decor and activities. So let's talk about vertical gardening. I thought this article was interesting, and my favorite part is simply the picture in it. There's a picture.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, there's a beautiful picture halfway down of a wall with boxes of framed sort of succulent paintings. And these succulents are growing on the wall, and they're absolutely stunning. And I don't really have a good place where I could give this a try, because inside the house I've got, plant-eating cats, and outside I think it's might be a little cold in our area, but it's so pretty.
Yeah, it's framed succulents on your wall. It's a stunning image, and because they have several different ones on the same wall, it's a three-dimensional form of art that I love.
Yeah.
And I want to try it. I don't know whether our new puppy would be able to get up and eat it, but it would if it could, I'm sure. But in addition to plants on the walls, there are 9 different suggestions. Aquaponics, the succulent wall that we're talking about, a macrame plant hanger. There's just so many ways to integrate living agriculture into your home, whether you're going to pluck a little bit of this to season a meal or whether it's going to be purely decorative. These are good for your household. They're good for the quality of the air. It's a lot of fun.
I think it's a great idea. And there's the first thing that's mentioned in the article is a prefab felt wall hanging planters. So this is something that would be a really easy way to just get into it. And I am actually considering, I have to look at in my kitchen whether I have a space that would, be away from the cats. And I think I do. But I would love to have just a little herb garden in my kitchen. I think that would be so fantastic. I've got herbs out in the front yard and I've got them out in the backyard, but then you sort of have to make a little bit of an effort, especially if it's raining, to go out and collect herbs when you're cooking.
Well, if you want to think the other direction entirely and really go big, check out the vertical forest link, which opens a story that has a picture of the Bosco Verticale, which is vertical forest in Italian. I didn't know Bosco was forest, but there you go. And it is 2 towers in Milan, Italy, that are alive with trees. They're striking. And just thinking about the integration of nature into our lives like that. We laugh about the Amazon headquarters here in Tacoma or in Seattle that has the biodome, where they have 4 stories of tropical plants and trees growing and people can meet in there. But that's really thinking ahead about how both indoors and outdoors we need to reintegrate the forests and the nature that we used to live among, but moved out of and into cities. This is in small ways in our own homes, and in big ways we should be thinking about it. Yeah,
I definitely think it would make a beautiful, if you live in a high rise, I think it would, change the atmosphere, literally the atmosphere, but it would really make you feel like you were in a different environment entirely if you had that kind of greenery all around you.
Yeah, and so it's encouraging to see people thinking about this in the design of their homes. It's the future potentially of at least small portions of our sustainable eating and an improved eating too that we could build.
It also connects people to nature in a really nice way, because in cities it's so easy to get detached from nature, and so many people are moving to cities. Like globally, the urban populations are increasing dramatically. So I think a lot of times when there's such a big shift, the culture kind of swings one way and then kind of comes back. So having more of these features in our homes, it's a way to kind of come back to center a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's like we were talking about spending in support of these things and of sustainability goals. Acting in your own home to decorate sustainably and to do something like this that reconnects us to nature it's closing the circle within ourselves.
I really like your idea, Evelyn, of using herbs, because a lot of times I'm in the kitchen and I'll think, a few basil leaves would taste great. And even if I have basil growing in my garden, sometimes my garden's not right next to my home, and sometimes I don't walk a few hundred feet for a few basil leaves.
Right. You're just probably not going to. Right.
I'm sure you would.
No, I agree. And I have the same thing. I've got rosemary out back, and I've got some lavender and oregano in front, and mostly they just live there. They don't get into the pot very often.
Yeah, or I'll make a big batch of something, like a big batch of pesto, but it doesn't creep its way into daily recipes as much.
Absolutely.
It's a 30-foot walk. That's the problem. It's like you need a car.
Yeah.
Shopping in LA.
That's right.
The garden has a way of sucking me into when I go out there to harvest something, then I'll think, I'll just pull a few. This plant's thirsty, and I'll check out what insects are eating.
Yeah. You get halfway across the yard, you've got 12 new jobs.
Right. Next thing I know, the lawnmower's out.
Oh, that would be difficult if you had dinner on the stove. Well, we also have an article that was kind of interesting about, do-it-yourself wooden pallet home decor. And this has a few really interesting ideas. I keep thinking about using wooden pallets. I keep thinking I need to make like a elevated dog bed area out in our patio for when we're away, but it's raining and the dogs need because, the dogs need an area to relax out of the rain, I think. Mm-hmm. And I think it would be better if it was elevated up off of the cement. So wooden pallets might be an option.
Well, I have 3 pallets in my garage, so this article was intriguing to me because I've been looking at them thinking, well, I don't want to throw those away.
Right.
And the thing about pallets is there are new pallets and old pallets, and this is really focused more on the old plain wood pallets rather than these new processed wood pallets. But the recovery of that material, and you can stain it to make it look beautiful, and the instructions in the article are great because it walks you through identifying the right kinds of pallets. It even explains how to treat the old nails so that you can continue to use the old nails even if they're rusty in the new construction you do with the pallet itself. So there's every piece is used here. It's very whole buffalo thinking, and you can break these down into furniture, into wall decorations, like we were talking before. In fact, these would be a great way to create the structure for the hanging garden. Yeah, and the disassembly and preparation is important because that's how you're going to make this otherwise wasted material into something that will endure in your home and look beautiful. So, all the right tools are listed. What you need to know about all of the steps along the way are in the article, and it's a DIY Wooden Pallet Home Decor Beginner's Guide. It's an article we recently refreshed, so we updated all the links and added some information. But Alice Valanassar was a contributor to the site about 2 years ago, and she did a great job with this article, so we wanted to get it out there again. Yeah,
I thought it was interesting. But here, this caught my eye. I mean, this is sort of apropos of nothing, but the calling... I have always called this tool a crowbar, but I've heard it's called a pry bar, but I have never heard it called a wrecking bar.
It is a wrecking bar. I had to think about that one too. It sounds so wrecking.
Yeah.
The traditional crowbar is also known as a wrecking bar because they're designed for tearing apart buildings.
Makes sense.
This article made me think about how when I lived in the dorms back in college, students would take these pallets to bunk the beds because we had 2 twin beds.
Oh.
Bunk beds, and you could basically just stick the frame into the pallet and it would make this really sturdy bunk bed configuration.
Well, that's clever.
Huh. Yeah, see, when I was in college, it was milk cartons that we repurposed into everything, but I don't recall using pallets.
Interesting.
Because of the frame on the bed, it probably just fit in just right.
Yeah, well, we built, it seems like every bookshelf in college was made with planks of wood and milk cartons.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're great for moving, too.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's right, because then you can take your books, put them in there, and take them to the next room that you're in.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So, Sarah, there's let's move on to the story that you did, because there's a whole lot of information on solar installer selection and contracting. And I think this is such an important thing for our listeners to know about, because if you're thinking about one of these projects, it's very easy if you do not lay the foundation to end up having it cost twice as much as you expected.
Yeah, and there are a lot of great solar installers out there, and then there's some really mediocre ones too. You know, I've heard of installers that don't follow electrical codes, and then people can get in trouble down the line, or it can cause equipment failure if the wire is undersized or things like that. So it's definitely worth doing the research and finding the right installer on the front end.
So where would you start?
If one great way is to look at online reviews and other people, you know, like it's fairly easy to know who has solar panels on their home because they're visible from the outside. So if you have any friends or neighbors or coworkers or family members, word of mouth is a great way. There's a solar review site that has a lot of reviews about different solar contractors. Energy Sage, I believe, also is a great resource for.
Yeah, we've worked with Energy Sage to get people connected to solar installers, and they've been very pleased with the outcome. So I think that's a good source.
Yeah, and one thing that I like about Energy Sage is they will help you get like 2 or 3 different quotes. Mm-hmm. Kind of like, if you wanted to get a new roof on your home or build a patio, many people will get 2, 3, 4 bids. And with solar, it's the same way. It's often recommended to get at least 2 or 3 bids. And that's also a way where you can potentially negotiate the price, say, hey, this company can install a system for this price. One problem, though, is that not all solar panels are created equal. So even if you're comparing solar panels with the same wattage output, they won't necessarily have the same output 10 years from now. They don't necessarily have the same warranties. Some people might want all black panels, because they have a more sleek, uniform experience look to them. So that can be difficult because just comparing quotes can get you in trouble. And then another thing...
and your eyes will glaze over on all the detail. Mm-hmm. You really need to spend the time to make distinctions, and that's what I think is challenging. And one of the reasons I found Energy Sage so useful to me was they also told me when my house wasn't ready for solar, and a lot of people wouldn't.
They just said there was too much shade.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But, there are other people, because I had 3 or 4 contractors come out and tell me too. And the 3 that came out said, oh, yeah, we can make this work. But when I asked them about the questions that Energy Sage raised, it turned out it wasn't going to work very well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and there are different devices that can be used to determine what your solar window is. And you really want to have a pretty good window of midday sun. Mm-hmm. If a fair amount of your midday sun is getting blocked, then it'll just take a lot longer for the solar panels to pay for themselves. And it kind of depends on where you live, what the payback period would be. Right. But if you live in a state, I believe Washington State has some of the lowest energy prices, don't they? So
yeah, and we also are mostly non-fossil fuel, except in Seattle.
That's interesting.
Well, paradox is what life's all about.
Another thing that can be helpful is to look for an installer that is NABCEP certified. That's the North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners. And so it doesn't necessarily guarantee quality workmanship, but at least that the installer has a fair amount of knowledge and field experience. Mm-hmm.
So what would you look for in a contract at the end of the day? I mean, when you're ready to sign the deal, what do you look for?
Well, you definitely want whatever they told you to be in the contract. Like I've heard of solar installers verbally tell people, hey, if you need to change your roof in a few years, we can take down and put back the panels for free. But then that's not in the contract. And then a few years later, when they call to get that done, they say, oh, that'll cost $3,000. So kind of like when negotiating any kind of contract, make sure any special promises are in writing. Also, a warranty is really important, because the equipment is going to have warranties. Mm-hmm. If you have to pay the installers to swap out a solar panel, that can actually really add up, or if they need to replace the inverter. So you also want to have a warranty on labor. It's great if the company has been around for a while, too, because if they're a really young company, it's hard to know if they're going to end up honoring their warranty. So that's one of the hard things, though, is a lot of solar companies have been around for, 5 years or something. So it's a little bit harder to tell if they're going to be around in 20 years. But
yeah, and that happens in the roofing business all the time. The same guy will pop up in a different business and run it for 3 or 4 years, make a bunch of warranties and walk away from that and then do it again. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I also, your point about making sure if there's a deadline at the end of the year before tax credits for that investment are lowered, that they're going to finish the project by then, and having that in writing is really important, because if they miss that, you can hold them to them accountable for the loss.
Yeah, unless the laws change as they're currently written, or the policy is currently written, after December 31st of each year, the federal tax credit is going to taper down. So like you said, if your system was supposed to be installed, say, in December of this year, and instead it's installed January of next year, then your tax credit, I believe, goes from 30% to 26%, which, adds up. If it's a $20,000 system, 4% of that, is a chunk of change. So it's just something to consider, to make sure that or possibly to have in there that there would be a penalty if they don't get it done in time. That could be another thing to consider.
I think those are really good points. And I have to say, Sarah, you've provided a couple of different articles on, home solar systems on the website, and they are always so helpful with, really useful information.
Oh, good. That's what I aim to do. Thank you.
Absolutely. And we've got another one coming from Sarah this week that has information about how to monitor your system once it's in place. So check that one out, too.
Excellent. I'll look forward to that one. Well, Mitch, I think you had mentioned before we started out that you've done a few interviews lately. Did you want to talk about those? Yeah,
we've got several interviews up, brand new ones, and a couple of them, all of them were interesting and exciting in their own ways. But we recently spoke with Mark Marinozzi, who is the VP of marketing for a company in California called World Centric, and they're a really interesting public benefit corporation that helps finance different kinds of projects around the world, and they are leading a campaign against polystyrene, also known as styrofoam. That's the trademark. And Mark explained the various challenges of disposing of this material, the fact that it's not profitable to recycle, the fact that it leaches styrenes, which mimic estrogen in the body. There's a lot of great information there. So check out the interview with Mark Marinozzi. We also spoke last Friday. We published the show with Dr. Graciela Chicholnitsky, who has an astonishing background. She's a PhD in economics and mathematics, and she co-authored the Kyoto Protocol, the first global climate change protocol. Has worked on, as the lead U.S. author, the IPCC, the UN Intergovernmental Project on Climate Change. She is the lead U.S. author on their reports. And she started a company in the carbon capture space called Global Thermometer. And what's really interesting about this, we've talked about carbon capture on a number of different shows and in articles on the site. This is the bonding of CO2 in the atmosphere to some kind of material that you can then take it off of and use the CO2 to make anything that requires carbon. So you can make fuels, you can make plastic, biodegradable plastic, you can make carbon fiber. Essentially, all the material for the next economy is in the atmosphere around us, and all we need to do is mine it. These are low-cost, low-energy units that could be attached to any industrial facility to capture all the carbon dioxide and essentially make it approach carbon neutral. And if these are then applied in other places where they are simply capturing carbon dioxide from the air, we can reduce the carbon dioxide in the air and start to move back towards the level we were at in 1800 before the industrial era. So it's just a fascinating conversation, and we were so pleased to have her on. And later this week, you'd be able to hear Joe Pickard, who is the chief economist at ISRI, the Institute for Scrap Recycling Industries, talking about where the recycling industry is today. Surprisingly, it grew, despite all the things that we heard, by 3.5% last year.
Wow.
And added 5% new employees. So we talked about the bans, and we talked about import and export. What's happening is more investment here in the United States to deal with the materials that we throw away today. And the level now is 30% is being exported as compared to about 50% before. So that's progress. So I check it out on Friday. It'll be out.
Sounds good. Those all three of those sound really interesting. Excellent.
Well, we're trying.
That's all we can do, right? Well, we have some good Earthling questions today. The first one comes from Nita. What I love about these is you just know there's some really, really interesting backstory, but we don't know what it is. But anyway, Nita in Bend, Oregon asks, she says, I have an old bus and I need to dispose of the bus. I have located a place to recycle the bus, but I must remove the foam from the seats in the bus. How do I get rid of the foam and seat covers?
Well, this is interesting. Now, if it had been in, if it was Ken Kesey's old bus, you'd have to disinfect it first, right? Because of all the intoxicants. But Bend is not a heavily supported recycling environment, and unfortunately, the best option here is going to be to take the seats to a municipal transfer station or to a scrapyard.
Yeah.
And they'll tear the seats apart. Don't worry about the materials inside, the metal in the seats. Take them out of the bus and give them there. So the Deschutes County transfer station system would be the right place to take those. Now, as for the bus, that's a fascinating thing. That's tons of metal. And,
tons of metal.
Not only is it worth something, you may not have to pay to have that bus recycled. You could literally sell the bus for recycling purposes.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, unlike a car where all of your interior surfaces are usually covered in vinyl and padding and everything, buses don't really have, if it's a school bus, they don't really have that. They're sort of just a metal case and that's it.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Big steel tube waiting to be recycled. Tube.
Yesterday, I went on a tour of our Commencement Bay, which is just the waterfront of Tacoma. And one of the places we went by is a place that does scrap metal, huge scrap metal yard. And they tear down and sort of digest cars. And they run them through these grinders that separates out the materials. And, the metal gets either shipped back to Asia or used or recycled otherwise. But the rubber and the foam gets sort of ground into a matter, chewed down into bits, and then it gets used in, they said it was used in landfills as sort of a intermediate layer in between the different layers of garbage. So, taking it to a center like a place that takes in autos for wrecking might be a way of disposing of it appropriately. It might actually do more than just go into the landfill. It may actually be broken down and used in some manner.
Yeah, and I think Nita's question really revolved around the fact is, do I have to break these seats down and take the foam apart and the cover apart rather than just send all of it to the scrap metal?
Yeah, I'd send it all.
And I would. Well, what I would do is I'd take given her situation, she's got somebody who'll take the bus. Although I think she ought to say, how much is this bus worth to you?
Right.
That could offset the cost of having the stuff taken to the right place to dispose of the seats.
Yeah, I agree. And I would also add in, be careful about dismantling things that are old foam and plastics because a lot of that stuff off gases and, puts all kinds of nasty bits of material into your wherever you be, home, workplace. So it's not necessarily something that it might seem logical to pull it all to pieces, but it may not be a good idea for any number of reasons.
Right.
All right. Well, here's
good question. Very
good question. And here's an opportunity, Mitch, for you to get a little bit more in depth on CBD. Valerie in Seattle asks, she says, I found your article on CBD and eco-friendliness informative. As you pointed out, the CBD industry has become huge and therefore confusing. Thanks for helping to point us in the right direction. My biggest question is how consumers can tell if what's on the label is accurate. There have been lots of reports where various labs have found disparities. Despite searching, I've been unable to find established labs, etc., which conduct such testing. This would give me something to look for when sorting through available products. Are you able to assist or at least give me some ideas on where to look?
Well, this is a great question. And this goes to the idea of provenance, where did this stuff come from and how did it get made and how did it get delivered to me? And this is particularly focused on the purity and efficacy of the CBD. But you should be looking at all of it, the packaging, the labeling, the paper the label is on. Is it all being sustainably made and is it recyclable? So let's talk about the potency.
Okay.
In Washington State, and in most states that are putting marijuana or cannabis into the public market, you have to track the growth of the material from seed to package. That is a delivery at the store. So they do DNA testing on seeds, on the material as it grows. So the plant's tested, then as it's harvested, it's tested, and then as it's packaged, it's tested. And in some cases, they'll even take material off the shelf at distribution and test those to see if they still match what they think they were doing back at the other end. That's done by the Washington Liquor and Cannabis Control Board in Washington State. They've contracted with a number of different organizations to do the testing. So here's the problem. You can't test every single molecule of the CBD because you wouldn't have anything left to sell. So there's variance across all of this material over time. You may be able to say this came from this seed, but what part of that came from that seed? One part of the plant can be more potent than another. So that's where this variance is coming from. And we don't have a way to do this sort of testing end to end that can be accurate down to eliminate the variance. So we have to do what we can do at this point. You can have your materials tested yourself, and those tests cost between $75 and $150 if you want to say, wow, this doesn't feel like there's enough CBD to me. But that really is, if, like in the case of an edible that you mentioned earlier, if it wasn't mixed thoroughly, that's another reason that you'll see variance in the potency.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of just, we're getting better at making this stuff. And what I see in a lot of investments in the cannabis industry is more focus on making sure that you're controlling the dosage.
Yeah.
So that is, it's not that just everything will solve itself, but that's being worked on. I would urge Valerie to be very thoughtful about the whole process rather than just the potency of the CBD, because that's what's going to contribute to ongoing consistency. There are also a number of companies that track the industry and have at various times looked at, what it's packaged in, but not from a sustainability standpoint. Just, are these packaged in glass, plastic, and otherwise. So there are market companies that could potentially step in and start to offer more of the sustainability information as well. One of the significant ones is Headset.io. I'll disclose that I'm an advisor to the company, so that take everything I say with a large sack of salt. But they have been tracking from grow to distributor. That information is available for the businesses. And as we've talked about on the show a couple dozen times now, business has pioneered a lot of our sustainability practices, but that we're not getting the visibility into that. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to become a source of validation and reference about what's the best product and service in terms of its potency and consistency.
Yeah. I would also add, for people who are in Washington State, and I don't know, but would assume that other states that have legalized recreational use would be the same. But I have found that going to the shops, going to the dedicated commercial cannabis shops, the folks working there are very knowledgeable and very helpful. So I've found that they will take the time to talk with you about what your issue might be, what you're looking for, what type of product would best suit your lifestyle. And so at least in Washington State, what I would do is I would go to the pot shop, the cannabis store, rather than going to Rite Aid or Bartell Drugs and picking up a product that has CBD in it.
Yeah, a lot of those stores will even have somebody who will consult with you, like a dedicated, come in and learn about this before you buy anything. Yeah,
I have to say, I've been really impressed by the folks working in these shops. They are they're enthusiastic, but they're really very thoughtful, and they are incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
So
and the stores are making plenty of money. They can certainly invest in educating you better. Ask them to.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely.
That's all. We're consumers.
Definitely.
Don't part with your money unless you feel like you're ready to part with it.
Yeah, Absolutely. So our last question, this is a little interesting one too, one we've probably all faced in one way or another, but Gina on Facebook asks this. She says, my workplace recycles batteries. Can you tell me if it's advisable or necessary to place single-use or rechargeable batteries in plastic bags before we put them in our cardboard drop box? If so, can you tell me what kind of plastic bags would be best and where I might get them? I would really appreciate any guidance you can give me.
So Gina's question is one we get a lot, and we do have guides to how to recycle single-use and rechargeable batteries on the site. So I would encourage everybody who's got this question to go look at those two articles. The basics are with regular batteries in A, B, C, and D batteries, all the ones you're used to buying off the shelf. Mm-hmm. Those are not, it's not necessary to tape or cover or put those in a bag. It may be convenient to put them in a bag, but then the battery recycler has a plastic bag that they don't have a recycling system for, so I wouldn't bother.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, as proof of this, TerraCycle's battery boxes, you can just drop the batteries in the box. Now, if you're talking about a lithium battery, on the other hand, and those are increasingly used in phones, which are often not removable, but in the case of drones are. And they're removable with drones, and they aren't even hard packs. They're soft, like squishy.
Ew.
Little bags of lithium.
That's kind of weirdly alarming, isn't it? I mean,
right. Well,
squishy bags
from a pollutant standpoint, and the fact that these things, if they're compressed, can explode.
Oh, okay.
So you want to, if you have a lithium-ion battery of any type, you need to tape the contacts on it, and you need to put it in something that won't allow it to be crushed. Because if it's crushed, it can burst into flame.
That would not be good.
So lots of details about that. But if you're just dealing with regular, traditional alkaline cell batteries, those don't need the tape. They don't need the box or the bag.
Well, and I would, excuse me, getting over a cold here. I'd add into that, Gina, if the box doesn't tell you to put it in a bag, then I think you're fine just popping the batteries in. I know our curbside recycling we'll take batteries in Tacoma, but specifically tells us to put them into a plastic bag. And that's so that they don't mix in with the other recyclables. Yeah. So usually the bag is either because there's a concern that you might have some old batteries that are kind of leaky, or to keep them from contacting other things that also might be in the vicinity of the batteries. But if you've got a dedicated space in your workplace that has a battery collection box, I don't think you need to put a bag in for that. Yeah,
the reason that those rules are in place is to help the recycling system identify and capture those materials. They're not there for safety.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right. Well, that's what we had for this episode of Sustainability in Your Ear. We really appreciate your Earthling questions, and we are very interested in your feedback. So you can send us an email at feedback@earth911.com, and you can find this podcast on all of your basic podcast platforms, and always on the earth911.com website. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.